for something that's called materialism, it actually really despises matter. It loves matter in the terms of like kind of sensory and, indulgence and like, oh, I get, to collect toys and all this kind of thing. But its attitude towards matter is like a master slave relationship or an exploitative relationship. And it's not, materialism is not a celebration of matter. Materialism comes from a deep wound around matter, really. And that's interesting too, because the word matter is associated with the word mother. And
Mhm.
it's, really how we are in relation to what you can call matter or the mother power here.
So,
That
so one
matter.
more time, if someone's a complete beginner to this stuff, they're fresh to it. What is animism? Give us the quick version of that. We're going to get into later how you almost turned me into an eco-terrorist, and mythology and AI. We're going to cover some heavy ground today, but let's just start with the basics. If someone says, "Oh, animism, what is that? Buddhism? Is it the same? What is that?"
Well, it's interesting because the word animism is a later colonial construct, anthropological construct that colonial era anthropologists used to describe the basic, mode of interaction with the cosmos that they saw in cultures absolutely everywhere. So animism, they had to, come up with it after the fact to describe it, but really what it is, again, is the default way of interacting with the cosmos. So in tradition after tradition after tradition, culture after culture, modern Western culture, go back just a few hundred years, and it's right there. This is the way that human beings have seen the cosmos. The cosmos is alive. The cosmos is teeming with agency. It's teeming with life. It's teeming with breath. It's we are interacting in relation with a living cosmos, and therefore we treat everything as alive and part of a great web of life. So, our relationship with the mountain isn't a relationship of, rulers over interacting with the matter that they own. The relationship with the mountain is one of the mountain is the source of the streams from which we get our water, and the water gives life to the food that we eat, and all of this is connected in a great living web of life. And this is in every tradition. It's in every cultural history. It is deep in European history. It's still in, I
Yeah,
mean, it's even in Christianity up until the age of industrialization. I mean, really, the age of industrialization is when you really start to chip away at kind of the animist foundation, and then you have the rise of humanism and, um, you know, the understandable turn away from religious viewpoints. But it's something that has infused global culture forever because it's, if we really open up to it, it's what we feel. It's what we can tell. We don't have to have, and it's not like some, I don't try to convince people that like, you should see the world this way or anything like that. I'm not trying to convince hardcore rationalists like, hey, tree spirits are real. That's not the point. The point is to open up perhaps our to understand the context from which we come and to open up our eyes a little bit, perhaps to a different way of seeing. And whether or not you believe in nature spirits or not, understanding that you treat the mountain fundamentally differently if you see it as alive versus if you see it dead is very, very important. There was a great conversation I had on the podcast a long time ago with a British author named Anne Rowe, who wrote a book about Orpheus, which is wonderful. And we were talking about animism and the centrality of animistic visions and this kind of thing. And she's like, yeah, it's funny. Like everyone kind of poo-poos animism in the modern world. And then, you go for a hike and you take a wrong turn on the trail and all of a sudden it's getting dark outside and people have become animists pretty quick.
yeah. Real quick, that goes away. And then,
Yeah,
as you say, there's this profound ethical, ecological implication. And to use a modern phrase, psychological health
mm,
implication, which is not just purely individual psychological, I think we'll get into. So sometimes I think of me, you, many of us as in recovery from modernity.
mm.
Not modern, not meaning like the latest iPhone, right? But like a state of being, a state of mind, a state of separation.
Mm.
What is that state of modernity and how does it screw us up?
Yeah, you know. the progressive separation and isolation of the human being from its various webs of interrelationality have a deep, profound effect on the human being. Just like isolating anything has a deep, profound effect on that thing that you have isolated. So you can talk.
Existential solitary confinement.
Yeah, exactly. And, I mean, we look at the mental health crises facing the world today, and a lot of it has to do with isolation and the anxiety that comes with isolation and not having contextual frameworks in which to process things and not having communal frameworks in which to process things. And people sometimes try to pinpoint like the exact moment in human history that this happened and this kind of thing, and it's not that easy. Traditional cultures all around the world have recognized that because of like, the makeup of our brains or because of, various mythic stories describe why this is, but that human beings have a tendency towards separation. We have a tendency towards feeling separate from the world in the way that like a salmon or a tiger probably doesn't feel separate from the world, right? And there are countless mythic stories for why we feel this way. And traditional cultures all over the world have recognized that the way to remember or to reconnect or to reestablish our continuity with the world is through some type of ritual remembering, some type of enacted remembering. So there's a tendency in the human being that's already there. There's a tendency towards separation. And then you could say that on the road to modern civilization, every step of the way, when kind of given a choice between, the path of separation or the path of remembering, we've chosen the path of separation. And, it's not like a great evil plot necessarily, though at some points in history it can look a lot like that. But literacy is a good example. Literacy is wonderful. I love books. Books are great. I read a lot of books. At the same time, they are literally a veil between us and the world. The written word is a symbol for something else. So when our experience primarily comes through the written word, we've created one wall of separation between us and the subject with which we are interacting, right? So, literacy, you can talk about the rise of civilization and the rise of big urban centers and the specialization of labor and all this kind of thing. And it's been a long road that human beings have been on, this road of separation, but each progressive step is a further separation. You know, I used to live in New York City and I would walk around the streets of New York City and I would feel like, there like this kind of fabricated environment that has its beauty to it, but it's certainly a fabricated environment and it feels a little bit distanced from kind of the workings of the natural world. And now you go to New York City and there's an added layer of distance that's been created by the fact that everybody's walking around staring into their smartphones. So they're not even interacting with the fabricated environment that they've created to separate themselves from the natural world. They're interacting with a fabricated environment within a fabricated environment. And these layers of separation, as is becoming increasingly clear through numerous scientific studies and all this, are having profound effects on our mental health, our bodies, our spiritual life, our sense of interconnection with each other. Yeah. So, you know, if we're going to work our way through, you can talk about this on so many levels. You can talk about it on like a purely environmental level, obviously. If we're going to work our way through some of the environmental crises that are facing us now, we have to have a feeling of interconnectedness. We have to have a feeling of what I do to the planet matters. We have to have a feeling of, love for the natural world. We have to have a basic experience of, oh, I'm connected to, Donald Trump was talking today about he's trying to, pin the blame for the California fires on liberals. So he's talking about, oh, if they hadn't tried to save that stupid, meaningless fish, we'd have more water to fight the fires with and all this kind of stuff. Stupid, meaningless fish. Well, nothing, first of all, that's not an accurate description of what happened. But second of all, nothing in nature is meaningless. Everything plays a part, everything has a role to play. And if we're going to address, what's happening environmentally, we have to be able to break down some of those barriers and feel our interconnectedness with the natural world.